How many of you are old enough to remember that the industry that Israel was once known for was citrus products? Oranges. Yeah, I see a lot of raising their hands. Okay. Well, today, as you know, Israel is not known for that, but it's known for high tech. Israel became the darling of the high tech boom. That is, the last high tech boom of the 1990s. The new darling in high tech is India. When you thought about an IT country in the 1990s, an IT country, you immediately thought of Israel. However, when people think of an IT country today, in the 2000s, they think about India. Now, I say this because I study global technology. I've been studying this area for many years as a professor. I've seen how quite democratic this terrain has become. Whereas once a tiny cabal of elite nations did high tech, now there are more than 100 countries exporting high-tech products and high-tech services. Personally, I stopped counting a few years ago. I was counting actually on a year-by-year basis when my co-author on my latest book came back from North Korea to view their software exporting industry. With so many countries entering high-tech, Israeli high-tech is no longer at the spotlight. Yes, there's an occasional article now and then from Business Week or The Economist saying Israel is a high-tech success story. So let's first review a little bit of what we've already heard about, the quick tour of high-tech, noting Israel's success indicators along the way. The first success indicator I want to point to is that Israel has been very inventive. Important artifacts came from Israel in the last decade. The software firewall, which we all have to use. The ingestible cameras, you know, that camera that you swallow that takes photos of your intestines. The design of many Intel semiconductors in whole or in part. Those are in our devices and laptops. They have come from Israel. And of course, instant messenger, IM. A number of people have alluded to the number of companies at NASDAQ, the tech-heavy NASDAQ. A third indicator is the impact on the Israeli economy. Israeli tech startups account for approximately 2% of GDP, which on a relative basis is higher than the United States. The fourth indicator is venture capital investment in Israel, and this is a good indicator of what's coming up in the future. In 2007, it was respectable, somewhere between 1.2 and 1.8 billion, depending on the assumptions that you make. And the investments were going into networks, communication, semiconductors, software, and internet, including Web 2.0, as well as life sciences. The fifth success indicator is what do the giant foreign companies think? And I think that this is a very telling one. Major tech multinational companies came into Israel decades ago and have bought not one Israeli company, but rather they are serial investors. They buy more and more Israeli tech firms. In other words, they're like repeat customers. They like what they see, so they come back for more. These global foreign tech companies have huge investments in Israel. IBM kicked off 2008 with a $300 million acquisition of the Israeli computer storage firm called 14. HP is a big eater of Israeli companies. It ate up Indigo in 2001 for $800 million, Cytex in 2005 for $230 million, and most recently Mercury in 2006 for $4.5 billion. Intel has 7,000 employees in Israel and has made several acquisitions over recent years. Cisco, Applied Materials, each has made several acquisitions, and the list goes on. The sixth indicator, I want to take you from small startups to the largest Israeli companies, the top 5 Israeli companies in terms of revenues or sales, kind of the equivalent of the Fortune 500. So if we look at the top 5, they're all high-tech, well, high-tech and medium-tech. I'm going to stretch this a little bit. And they're all very heavy exporters. Number 1 is Teva, who we've heard about. It's a pharmaceutical firm, $8 billion in sales. Number 2 is an IT firm, Amdocs, 16,000 employees, $4 billion in sales. Number 3 and number 4 are both in chemicals and agritech. That's Makhtashim in number 3. Number 4 is Israel Chemicals. And number 5 is an aircraft company, Israel Aircraft Industries. So, I just told you what's right, those success indicators. So besides what I opened up with, Israeli tech being slightly forgotten now that India and China are big successes, is there anything wrong? with high-tech in Israel. So let's go back to that turning point in Israel high-tech history, the downturn, the year 2000. In and since the year 2000, a trifecta of disasters hit Israeli tech. The NASDAQ.com bust happened, and we've heard about that. The Palestinian Intifada began in late 2000. And another interesting development, since 2000, many American firms began shifting attention to offshoring and sourcing to India and to China. And from the high-tech perspective, we have even another few problems, or tzoros, as we would say in Yiddish. I'll list three of them. The first problem was summed up in 2005 by Chemi Peres. He's the head of Patango, the largest Israeli indigenous venture capital company, and he's also the son of the president of Israel. He said, R&D will move offshore if Israel doesn't invest in education and R&D. And indeed, we saw some very bad omens in the last few months. There were two very bad strikes. There was a 3-month strike in the elite universities in late 2007, and at the same time, a 3-month strike in secondary schools in Israel. The second problem with Israeli high-tech is wages. Wages have always been higher in Israel than in developing countries like India. But even worse, in the last year, of course, for the first time since the biblical times of King David, the shekel has gone up relative to the dollar. It's gone up about 20%. The third problem is that since 2000, Israeli companies themselves have begun sending work offshore to cheap destinations. Israelis source to India, to Eastern Europe, and now even to China. By 2005 already, 4 of Israel's big 5 IT companies were offshoring to India, and that's Amdocs, Converse, Mercury, and Ness. So let's come back to the Israel versus India comparison that I set up at the beginning. Recall that Israel has lost its prominence to India in the minds of many, but let's do some comparisons. Of course, India is much larger. Its middle class is about 50 times larger than Israel. The employment in tech and IT-enabled services, which is somewhat related, is about 40 times greater than Israel. However, the exports in tech, and I'm doing this very broadly, are roughly in the same range, somewhere between $25 and $50 billion a year. Whereas India continues to have advantages due to its size and low wages, the advantages of Israel remain its creative, innovative, entrepreneurial tech culture. This is a culture of startups for high-end innovation that we'll hear about in this panel. In fact, many Israelis are more worried about competition with China than with India. And maybe even rather than China or India, Israel should be compared, as Neil already did earlier, with other small, successful island countries, which are Singapore, Ireland, and Taiwan. So let me conclude by making an observation about the trajectory of Israel's high-tech, using venture capital as a leading indicator of what's to come. First, the good news. Venture capital in 2007 is flowing into the same super successful sectors that were big in Israel in the 1990s. Most are going, as I've already noted, but I'll repeat it, to networks, communications, semiconductors, software, internet, including Web 2.0. This is an indicator of Israel's profound strengths in these areas. Now for the bad news. The bad news is this blessing is also a cause for some worry, because it means that in the next tech downturn, which we might have already just started in recent weeks and months, Israel again will not be diversified in terms of its tech sector and may suffer a serious blow. So here to discuss these successes and the conundrums that I've begun to set up for you are members of our distinguished panel here. As has already been done in the morning, I will not be reading the bios, but only introducing the speakers briefly. And the first speaker, I'm delighted to welcome Amir Orad, who's Executive Vice President at Actimize, an Israeli company. Amir?